Hey, everybody, welcome to the Paul Young podcast. Sometimes there are worlds, I think often, there are worlds that are taking place all around us and we are just ignorant of it. And it's not our fault. We just never intersect them. I met Jessica Lamb about a year ago when I was speaking in Nashville at a large conference. A lot of people there were doing wonderful things that I had no idea existed. And Jessica is one of them. As you listen to this, think about a couple things. One is how love is the best apologetic. When I say apologetic, it's a big word for defense of the faith. I grew up in a time where being able to answer all the questions for any skeptic was the defense of the faith. I don't see it that way anymore. I think the best apologetic, and one you don't even have to try to figure out, is to love the one who's in front of you. And you'll hear about that. You'll also be kind of amazed at Jessica's own process and struggle and continuing struggle, and yet at the same time being able to express love to the world. So with that, let's listen to Jessica Lamb.
You're listening to the Paul Young Podcast.
So let's start there. Tell me about your grandma and tell me why she had such an influence and an impact in your life. Tell me some grandma stories.
Well, I recently lost my Meemaw like a month ago, so it's very fresh, but she was my lifeline. She took me in as a teenager because I was kicked out. I also ran away a lot, and she believed me when a lot of people didn't. She advocated for me. Family dinners that I wasn't welcome at, if she saw that I wasn't there, she would leave the room and she would get in her car and leave. If people were trying to make me the brunt of their jokes, like family members, she would shut the conversations down. She was my biggest advocate, my biggest ally, my safety net. And my life really doesn't feel the same without her recently. She helped me get away from my first trafficker. She took me in before I met him, and then my parents brought me back, and then they kicked me out again, and I didn't want to be a burden on her. So it's always been drilled into me since I was very, very young that I was a burden on people, that I was overly sensitive, that I was a problem. I was the bad kid, kind of almost like the scapegoat. So all of the family issues, all the insecurities kind of fell on me. And my soft place to land was my grandma. So yeah, she took care of me when she got me away from my first trafficker. I had a really hard time just doing just basic daily things, taking a bath, eating, things like that. Yeah, as a teenager, she would help me wash my hair and she would sing like hymnals to me, like old gospel songs.
Uh-huh.
She was very, very, her faith was extremely important to her. And she lived it out, not in your face. She lived it out in just quiet actions and in love and in understanding and empathy. That is the type of person that if I want to be anything like, it would be like that. But she tried to get me mental health counseling, tried to help me finish my education. Her and my aunt was living with her at the time. They both were trying to make sure that I was trying to get the care that I needed. I fell really hard after I left my first trafficker into drugs. And she kept telling me I'd come over there to eat and I'd come over there to sleep and take a shower and then I'd leave. And she would tell me, like, when I was trying to do that with my folks, it would be like, we're not a revolving door. This is not some type of sleazy hotel. But my grandmother would look at me and say, you're always welcome. There's always food here. There's always a shower here. Come and go as you please. And so she made a big impact in my life. And I've heard some kind of cringy things, the last month or so. And I know that people mean well. And sometimes people just don't know what to say when you're in grief. And so like, she was old. You've had plenty of time with her. And I'm like, I don't think people understand the magnitude that she made on my life. So yeah, that's, in a nutshell, it's actually kind of crazy. It's sitting here in my room. The hot toy for Squishmallows for this season, for this past Christmas season, was a sushi roll. She would have never ate sushi. It just wasn't her style. She was country cooking type of grandma. And the Squishmallow of the season this year, it actually had her name on
Wow.
it.
Wow.
And so like I have a bunch, people started giving them to me. So it's just like little things, that remind me of her every day. Birds are a huge significance to me. When I lived with her, my windows always faced big oak trees, and they were always filled with birds, and always there was always bird feeders and hummingbird feeders like everywhere around our house. So I use it as my emblem on my nonprofit, is because it's not just a symbol of freedom. Like it's deep rooted into my personal struggles as well as a symbol of freedom. But it's not just because everybody uses birds for anti-trafficking stuff, but it has a significant meaning to me. And so she's played a huge role in my life. And I don't think I would be here without her.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, in the loss of someone, it creates a space where they were, a space that doesn't leave. Nobody else will fill that space. And so
Yeah.
you have to begin to build a life around that space. A lot of people try to deny it instead of celebrate it. So I'm sad with you about her loss. And
Yeah, she was a very pivotal person in my life. And I can recall my parents were vacationing somewhere, and I was pregnant with a guy that I was living on the streets with. And I lost that baby at 4 months, and my parents were out of the country. And my aunt and my Meemaw took me to the hospital, and I had lost the baby. And my Meemaw went with me, and we wrapped the baby. It was it was only 4 months, but I knew it was a girl, and she helped me lay her to rest. So like I just have a lot of memories of some of my toughest times of my life, and she was always by my side. And I was able to be with her, and I had the honor of being with her until she passed back in November. So
mm. Can I ask you about how you met your first trafficker?
yes, my dad was harping on me a lot about paying rent, and I was not, I had already had to drop out of high school. And so I was trying to look for a job. And I'm very artsy. I love music, writing, poetry. I'm just very all over the place when it comes to the arts and things. And so I was flipping through an art magazine, and there were some job listings in the back. And I called the first thing that I saw that said a customer service representative needed. And it stated that like I'd have a place to stay, and it said that I could, I called the number, and a woman answered, and she was like, I told her, I was like, man, I'm not getting along with my folks. I don't want to be a burden on my grandma. I don't really have a place to go, and I'm willing to do, the job. I just need a place to sleep. So like I just kind of threw out all my vulnerabilities out there, and they told me, you drive out here. And I felt really skeptical about it at first. And I actually stayed with somebody from my church the night before. He was like a super creep, but I stayed there. He told me I couldn't live there, and he threw $20 on the counter. And I was like, I had $20, a Geo Prism car that my Mimo had given me for Christmas the year before. And I had just gotten my license, and I drove out to Spalding County in Griffin, Georgia. And I met Cy. He went by the name of Cy. And I met him at a gas station, and I was like, "Where's your car?" And he said it was in the shop. And he said, "We can use yours until we get my tires fixed and all that." And I was like, "Okay, cool." I never saw a car. We used mine for everything. But yeah, I met him through a false job ad. And then I just felt like I didn't have any other options. And so I just stayed. And people are like, "You could have left anytime you want." Well, not really. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to turn to. My first trafficker put so much in my head of how I was not wanted, which also just fueled the feeling of not being wanted since I was young. And so it just kind of built on that. And so it was like a mental game, and I believed him. And so I kind of got stuck there for a while. And as you heard me share at that conference that you and I met at, 2 years after I left my first trafficker, I read your book. I actually did a painting off of your book, one of the visions that you had in your dream. Like it was like a garden with a bridge and everything. And I painted it. A lot of stuff happened after that. I met a second trafficker when I was dating this incredible, what I thought was this incredible guy. I met my second trafficker trying to look for employment because I didn't have an education. I didn't have anything. I didn't have any job skills. So, I was trying to date this Ivy League college guy from a great family, and I'm just some girl from the streets. And so like I never felt like I measured up there either. So I found myself going back into exploitation. So like it's just been a lot. I've had two exploiters. I've been homeless. I've been on the streets of Atlanta. I've ate out of trash cans. I've begged people at gas stations for money, not for drugs, but just so I could put gas in my car or just so I could buy something to eat when I was at the gas station. Or there were times that I would have to bathe in gas stations. Talking about the feeling of shame and disgust with myself, just having to hold the door with one foot, trying to just bathe in before I get back in my car and find a place to sleep for the night. That stuff weighs on you after a while and it sticks with you.
Can I say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sad about that. And there are so many out there that are doing exactly the same thing.
Something I keep trying to push is here in Georgia, we have this statutes of limitations. And I was trafficked as a child up into my young adult years, and there's no justice. And we keep hearing these larger orgs talk about empowering survivors and justice for all survivors. And there are so many survivors, and I'm not just talking about myself. I'm talking about I talk to them on a daily basis where these orgs have failed them, and they're coming to me asking, "Can you help me with this? Can you help me with that?" We have a lot of laws and rules here in Georgia that put a lot of limitations on survivors if they don't check certain boxes. And to me, that's not justice for all and it's not true advocacy. And so I get a lot of pushback for that. And I know that it doesn't make me the most popular person in the room or it gets me uninvited to things. And I'm okay with that. Sometimes it hurts, especially being a survivor that was trafficked here in Georgia. And these are Georgia orgs. But I continue to do the work. I continue to believe in survivors and advocating for all survivors, no matter what walk of life they come through, no matter their religious background, no matter how they identify. It doesn't matter to me. Advocacy is advocacy.
Yep. How did you break from all of that? How did you break up?
How did I get away from my first trafficker?
Or from that, yeah, or from your second?
My first trafficker, I got away from him. He tried to end my life the night before, and I don't know how the hell I did it, but I somehow got him off that ledge and I was able to calm him down. And when he stopped being violent, we had fallen asleep. And he fallen asleep. I had laid there. And then there was another woman, his girlfriend, it was the bottom that was also there. And I told him, I was like, I'm running to the restroom. I'll be right back. And I'm going to smoke a cigarette on the front porch. And he said, if you think about leaving me, I'm going to shoot you. And I was like, I'm not going to leave. I love you. I told him all kinds of horse crap just to get him off of me. I went downstairs. I lit my cigarette. I took two drags off of it. And across the street was a Salvation Army that had just opened for business for the day. It's like one of those with like the thrift stores in them and stuff. And so I went in there and I asked them to call 911. And the first person I called was my dad. And my dad was like, oh God, what did you get yourself into this time? What kind of trouble are you into this time? And I didn't even entertain him. I just hung up on him. I was like, I'm not even going to do this right now. I don't have time for this. Next person I called was my Meemaw. And she said, hang up with me, call 911. I'm on standby. Bring your car to my house if you can get your car. And the law enforcement officers came out. They did their investigation. And I know this is not a video, so you can't see me do the quotations, right. But they did their investigation and they were like, well, what do you want from us? We don't want to do this paperwork. We just got on duty. This, like all these things. And I was like, you know what? If you could just get my car and my keys and my belongings, I'm out. I just want to get out. And he's like, yeah. And then he fist bumps my trafficker on the front porch. And he was like, she's not going to be a problem. I remember my trafficker telling me on repeat, I'm not going to jail over some dumb kid. I'm not going back to jail over some dumb kid. He would say it all the time. The Salvation Army got law enforcement out there. That's how it was dealt with. And I never received justice. And I turned 40 in May. And I've yet to receive any justice for anything that I have dealt with or gone through. I'm not bitter about it, but I'm angry in a sense of I don't want to see this happen to somebody else. Yeah. I don't want to see another survivor being told, you don't check our boxes, so no justice for you.
Now, a lot of people who are listening to us, they don't know about branding. Can you just talk about that and then what you did about that? Getting a brand from a trafficker.
The branding. Yes. So my trafficker took me to a tattoo shop that used to be off of Covington Highway or in DeKalb County. And I drive that highway all the time. I have to pass where that building was. And he brought me into the shop and he was like, he's like, this artist has a fetish for women who, well, he wants to tattoo a woman while he's receiving oral sex. And so I received my tattoo that way. So a woman serviced him while I got my tattoo. And sometimes, not often, and I actually posted this on LinkedIn yesterday, that not every survivor has a tattoo from their exploitation. Some of them do use it as a way of control. They can use it as a way of trauma bonding. It could be them showing loyalty to their trafficker for protection. They could have gotten it because there's a trauma bond there, or Stockholm syndrome, just all different types of reasoning of why somebody may have gotten that tattoo. But not every survivor has one. Some of them have self-harm. Some of them have track marks from drug addiction. Not all. I'm not saying everybody's an addict and everybody's a self-harmer, but they will use these marks as a means of control. And it's just another way of bringing shame, in my opinion. I know that the tattoo I had was on my wrist, and then I had one on my backside. I had those covered up in 2016. And then I launched my nonprofit in 2017. And I made it my goal to ensure that no survivor has to live with that on their body anymore, to the best that I could with the funding that I could come up with. And so that's how I got started with Atlanta Redemption Inc. Is it started with my cover up and my story, and then I helped somebody else, and then I helped somebody else, and then it went from 3 to, gosh, I think we've helped 1,200 something people, and I've trained over 12,000 law enforcement officers on identification and iconography and the history behind the tattoos and why traffickers use them and how they're a means of control. And I also try to talk about self-harm and breaking the stigmas of self-harm. So there's a lot of that encompasses in Atlanta Redemption Inc. and Ari. It's not just let's slap a tattoo on and good luck. There are survivors that I helped 8 years ago that I still have daily conversations with. I don't turn my back on people, especially if I'm going to advocate for them. I'm not going to just be like, oh, well, I'm glad you're all better. Bye. It's my mission I want them to exceed. I want them to excel and break those glass ceilings.
When you
I'm
say,
not the beacon.
when you say Redemption Inc., it's INK, correct?
INK, like tattooing.
Yep. So when you help them with these tattoos, what are you doing? What are you doing for them?
It's basically giving them a new lease on, how they feel about their body and their self-confidence. Their self-confidence goes up. Recidivism rates, we help gang members take tattoos off their faces. We help gang members remove old tattoos and stuff like that. And so they're able to get better job opportunities. Say if there's a young woman or a young man or however they choose to identify, they have self-harm scars. They don't want to go into a job interview and then they'd be like, well, what's that about? And then they have that stigma, right? So these are just opportunities. If they choose to take them, it's totally up to them. I know lots of survivors that choose to keep their trafficking brands. Everybody's journey is different and healing is not linear. And so I'm sorry, I forgot the initial question.
The question was about, and let me put it a different way. So you are either a lot of times covering up an existing tattoo or you are removing it, correct?
Yes, we're either going to be covering the tattoo with something else, which basically camouflages what was already there. I do have a very good eye for knowing when something was a cover up, but for the most part, it's a camouflaging of what was there before. And it just boosts that self confidence. And then when it comes to the removals, we do that process as well. And then we do scar revision. Say if somebody does not want to tattoo over a scar, we actually have a method that will take those self-harm scars, as long as they're not raised, and bring them down to 50 to 75%.
Okay, so, and you have a network that you've identified that is across.
Yes, I built a network. It started here in Georgia. I had just a few handful of shops that were like, this is awesome. How can we be a part? They've been my OGs and my ride or dies since I started. They're still on my team. And then I started getting requests from Tennessee, and then I started getting requests from Texas, and then I started getting requests from Florida. And then it began to just grow and grow and grow. And then we started noticing that we went from Atlanta Redemption Inc. to helping survivors all the way over into Redding, California, or over in Sacramento. And we've helped people in Brooklyn, New York. Like there's all kinds of different places that we've been able to cultivate this and make this happen with trusted allies and trusted tattoo shops. There is another amazing gentleman that is a very dear friend of mine that he does this out of his shop in Oswego, Illinois. So like it's happening, but A lot of people think that this is an outdated method, and we have data to prove otherwise. We get applications weekly from women and men and all different people that are like, hey, I have this tattoo and these scars. Can you help me? So it's not an outdated method. And it's an honor to be able to help and walk alongside them every step from the beginning to end. And then I try to cultivate that relationship with them afterwards.
It's almost like you're taking what your Mima did in your life, and you're just now pushing that same thing out because you're building relationships. You're helping people with their sense of who they are, their self-worth, all of these things, which sounds just like her.
That's a compliment, because if somebody says that I carry her spirit with me, I could not have think of a better compliment, because that's what I just want to do. Is I just want to love people where they're at. And I think that oftentimes we put barriers on people, not we as in a nonprofit, but just we as a culture, put barriers on people, as a society, put barriers on people. And people just want to be seen, heard, loved, and compassion. And people want connection. And if I can offer them that through a few hours in a tattoo shop for one or two people, it's worth it.
Absolutely. I don't want to sound like a Christian looking for an advertisement, but your grandma, your Mima, had a strong faith. Is that the basis of how you then embrace your sense of faith?
Can you reword that for me?
Yeah, because when we were talking at the conference, there was a strong sense that your Mima had planted in you the seeds of a faith walk. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I actually was thinking about that recently. I remember sitting at Orion's with my Mimo, and I was like, how do I know that this is all real? How do I know that God is real? How do I know that there is a heaven? Instead of coming at me with, well, you just have to have faith and read your Bible,
Yeah.
she actually approached it with, you know what? I've struggled with the same questions. And I understand your questions, and she welcomed my questions. She responded to them with grace. That's, to me, the way I would see Jesus doing that. He welcomed the questions, and he welcomed that, but he also spoke the truth, and people killed him for it. And so I think that, like, I struggle. I'm just being transparent. I do struggle with my faith. It's not that I'm not a believer. It's just that I have a lot of deep wounds from churches and believers and people that are representatives of God. And I have to get past my head sometimes and remember that it's not about that. It's about loving people where they're at, because that's what Jesus would want us to do. Jesus didn't sit on platforms and shout his message and condemn others. What he did was he got in the dirt and he loved them where they were.
That's beautiful. Is there anything else that comes to mind that you would want folks to be aware of? Because I know you're doing a lot of advocacy work, and we're going to post how people can contact you in terms of whether they would like to support, or whether they have questions, or whether they have somebody that they want to connect that might need your help. Is there anything else that you would like to add to what we've been talking about? It's fantastic, by the way, what you're doing.
Thank you. I'm actually very inspired by you, as well as I shared at that conference. There's so much on the advocacy side that I wish I could say. And it's not a 2-second answer or a very short answer, unfortunately. If I could encourage anybody, it's to listen to survivors. Survivor leaders have a lot of things to bring to the table. And when you charge them for their voices to be heard, or to show up at lobby days or advocacy days for their voices to be heard, or you cause division or pit survivors against each other in the movement, it does nothing but create strife. And it does not move the needle any closer to where it needs to go. And so there really needs to be more of networking and collaborating. I know that's a buzzword right now, but networking and collaborating, then there needs to be of, that's my lane, that's your lane. You stay there, I stay there. When I think of survivors, I think of, we have a place in every place that human trafficking and commercial exploitation is being discussed. There's no reason that there should not be a survivor in the room, not one that's been bullied by a nonprofit to say what, or puppeted, but somebody that actually comes in there with their truth and says, this is where we're lacking and this is where we need to pick up the pace. Having an open mind and an open heart to survivor leaders in the movement for us to be heard, not just ones that have a lot of flash, but ones that really need their voices to be elevated, that would make a huge step. We always need people to join our team, volunteers, donors, people that will fund it. I remember the first tattoo appointment I went on, I had $50 in my pocket, and that's all I could give the tattoo artist. And he did it anyway. And it was the most beautiful cover up. And I'll never forget it. Every tattoo cover up that we've done at ARI is permanently tattooed on my heart, for lack of a better term. And it's because I'm invested and I care and I want to see them flourish.
So little snapshot of your life now. Well, maybe not.
2024 was a rough year for me. That a lot of things happened, and it was kind of like boom, 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 one thing on top of another. And I'm like trying to come up for air sometimes.
Yeah.
Is a struggle, as I know that you have shared that about your own life experiences. But survivors, we have this deep rooted watch me go attitude. Watch me. Every brick that has ever been thrown at me since childhood, I have built back stronger. In 2024 almost took me out.
Mhm.
And I know that 2025, and I'm not a New Year's resolution person, but I believe that 2025, I'm coming back to buy the building.
Good for you. Jessica, thank you so much for what you're doing, the vulnerability, for educating us, for advocating for the least of these, giving them the hope that should have always been there. I love you dearly, and we'll see
I
if
love you dearly. I mean, you mean so much to me. I actually just was talking about you yesterday to a very dear colleague of mine. She runs a nonprofit called Nurses United Against Human Trafficking. She's a phenomenal woman, Fran Bononeri. And I was telling her, I was like, I'm getting to talk to Paul Young, who played a part of my story, whether you see it as big or small. I had a pastor that gave me your book on audio because that was the best way I could follow along. I had a pastor named Tim Hogg, and he gave me your book on audio. Fell in love with it. Then I had to go watch the movie.
you probably, like me, cried a lot.
I cried like I'm a crier. I try not to admit that. I just did that on a podcast, but I'm very, as I've been told since I was a kid, I'm just so sensitive and overly sensitive, but I just feel things very deeply. And sometimes it comes out in anger. Sometimes it comes out in crying. Sometimes it comes out as me just being super hyper. But I just really care, and I'm really passionate about this work and seeing people, the whole person,
Yeah.
healed,
Yeah.
not just parts.
Yeah. My blessing for 2025 is may comfort kiss your cheek and freedom kick your ass.
I like that.
Yeah, so do I. I think I got from the Holy Spirit.